So I thought I might speak in English because then I can be certain of what I'm saying. Sometimes when I speak in Hebrew, afterwards I'm not quite sure what I said. It's my impression, after many years working in oncology, palliative care and psycho-oncology, that words like anxiety, depression, demoralization, dignity aren't really so useful to us in our day-to-day communication with patients. You know, anxiety is not very discriminatory, the word. A lot of people are anxious in the street, in the house, swimming pools, anxious, but it's not very diagnostic for our patients, I don't think. Similarly, depression. Firstly, in our population, psycho-oncology, major depression, major psychotic depression is relatively uncommon. It's usually things like sadness, downness, and so forth. Demoralization is a more recent addition to the catalogue of descriptions of what happens to our patients psychologically. Dignity as well. Now, all these things have been made into measures, and some of them being manualized. Manualized means that they've been made into books and manuals that you can then treat the patients according to the original definition. But I've got to tell you, when I'm sitting in front of my patients, I don't think in those terms. When I hear people talk about anxiety and depression, the reflex is medications, anxiolytic medications, antidepressant medications. So over the years, I've come to think of prime movers in psychology. And so far I've collected 5 prime movers, and I'll explain what I mean by them. There's angst, anger, courage, heroism, and hope. And today we'll speak about hope. Equally, we could speak about any of the other ones at length. Angst is a form of anxiety, clearly, but angst has got this feeling and meaning of the terror of death. Angst is related fairly specifically to the existential crisis of life and death. Anger is very common in our clinic. We don't talk about it much. We don't diagnose anger, but anger represents that subjective sense of injustice of the world. Similarly, courage. We say we encourage our patients, but we don't really get into the guts of courage, because if we were to get into the guts of courage, we'd say, well, are these patients cowards? Are they cowardly when they're having to face these difficulties of cancer? And then, of course, there's heroism, which has been defined by Becker as a reflex of the fear of death, the sense of being a hero, which is also a defense, if you like, against the fear of death. And finally, there's hope. And today we're going to talk about hope. So I just want to put in perspective how I see the issues of psycho-oncology after many years in the field in the year 2023. So the talk today is hope against death. We hope we won't die, which is an obvious thing, but we also use hope to defend ourselves against the fear of death. Hope is a complicated thing, I think. It's taken me a number of years to really understand it. It's like a two-edged sword. On the one hand, it can encourage us to achieve really, really great things. But on the other hand, hope can also take us to risks and to do things that we'll fail against. So I think hope is a double-edged sword like that. And today we want to talk about that. Oh, it's not going down again. Oh, yes, it has. So this is a building in Melbourne in Australia. It's the Fire Brigade building. And you can see on the wall of the Fire Brigade building a mosaic. It's got 1 million pieces of glass, and it took the guy 1.5 years to do. And it's a picture of the Greek myth of Zeus, the king of the Greeks, gods, who was responding to Prometheus, I can't hear, this guy here, Prometheus, who stole fire from the Greek gods. And they were very upset about this, so there had to be a punishment. Jesus, come, what the hell is going on here? And we can see a part of the picture here is a lady called Pandora. Pandora was a lady that was created by the Greek god Zeus. And she was created, the first woman that was created, which she created, according to one of the myths, as a punishment to Prometheus for stealing the fire. And she was given this box. And in this box, she was told never to open the box. But of course, curiosity got the better of her, and she opened the box. And you can see in the background picture there, part of this mosaic, all the evils of the world escaped: fire, famine, destruction, plague, murder. And when she saw this come out, she immediately slammed the lid shut of the box. And trapped inside the box was hope. And so that raises the question, is hope a good thing, or is hope a bad thing? Is hope a good thing that she managed to save from getting out? Or is it a bad thing that she trapped inside for later purpose? In passing, we'll note that the story of the first woman created, Pandora, who was told not to open this box, is in a way similar to the story of Eve in the Garden of Eden, where Eve was told not to eat of the tree of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. And both women were overcome with curiosity and opened the box. Now, interestingly, it was never a box. In the original story by Hesiod in the 7th century BCE, the story was that it was a jar. And somebody called Erasmus of Rotterdam mistranslated it in the 15th or 16th century from jar to box. So it was originally a jar, which is interesting because there are feminist interpretations of the myth or story of Pandora, that in fact the jar visually represents the uterus. If you think it's upside down, it's as a uterus. And one of the stories, one of the interpretations of the story of Pandora is that in fact it was written by a man, and it was the fear of the loss of virginity, which is curious because all the evils of the world came out, and as it were, men lost control. But what's just as interesting, of course, is the story of Eve in the Garden of Eden, because she was tempted to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, tempted by the snake. And the snake, as you know, in many ways represents the male organ. So we can see here that there might be different interpretations of the release of the fear and panic by eating of this. But we'll go on. Nevertheless, the Greeks thought that hope was evil. This is Nietzsche. He was an interpreter of the ancient Greeks. He said that because hope could keep people in continual suspense, the Greeks thought that hope was evil. So that sort of fits into the story of the Pandora's box. So how do we understand today hope being evil? It doesn't really fit into our Western Judeo-Christian ethic today. But the Greeks thought that hope was evil because it trapped people into searching after impossible goals. So it's a bit like our patients. If they've got advanced cancer and they keep searching and trying to find a cure and keep trying and trying and trying, every time a new hope, a new hope, a new hope, sometimes we might see that as not so good. The Greeks called it evil. We don't have to call it that. But that's one of the things that we should think about in talking about hope. So in some ways, one of the hypotheses I want to raise today is maintaining hope to the end of life the ideal of palliative care? I'll say that again. Are we doing our patients and their families the best service by encouraging and giving them hope with different treatments because we think that's good for them and until they die? But then came along the Judeo-Christian ethic, long after the ancient Greeks disappeared. There's a chap called Karl Menninger. He was a Christian psychiatrist, opened a number of psychiatric clinics in America. And he said the following in an article from '59. Love, faith, hope, the Greeks were wrong. Of course hope is real. Of course it is not evil. It is an enemy of evil and an ally of love. So it's really extraordinary here. We have these two competing ideas about hope. One says it's evil. One says it's the best thing in the world. What is hope? So today I want to understand what hope is and see, not that there will be a solution to what hope is, but how we can best use it in our, or at least understand how it is being used in our clinical practice. So there's big argument in the literature about what is hope. There are all sorts of definitions. I'm going to give mine today. I just think mine is right, but everybody thinks theirs is right. So some people think hope is a cognitive thing. It's a brain thing. It's something that you work out and you aim to achieve a goal and you go for it. Other people think hope is more like a spiritual, emotional, feeling thing that takes you along. And we'll discuss, what I think and some of the literature. I think hope has got three essential characteristics. This is the first one. I think that hope is a thought directed exclusively to the future. In other words, you can only hope into the future. You can't hope into the past. You can't even hope in the present. You only hope into the future. You can try it yourselves. Let's say, I hope it rained yesterday in Eilat. That's not meaningful. What's lacking is information. You can't say, I hope in the past. You say, I am hoping now, but the now disappears instantaneously. It's always in the future, which is very, very important. Because you cannot hope against an impossibility or a certainty. So if I know something for sure is going to happen, I don't say, I hope it will happen. Because the thing about the future is it's uncertain, we don't know. So every time that we hope into the future and we are uncertain about it. That is the way our brains are hardwired, whether you live in Australia, India, or Israel. It's hardwired like that. Every time you hope, it's into the future, in uncertainty, and that's where it is. And I don't see anything around that, and that has certain consequences. For example, there's a guy, Harold Boris, a psychoanalyst from New York, last century. He said this, he wrote a beautiful paper about hope, but he said this phrase, we maintain ambiguity in order to preserve hope. say it again. We create uncertain situations in order to develop hope, to make hope. In other words, we build uncertainty into the future so that we can have hope. We do that all the time in medicine. So we have patients come in, they're desperate, the disease is getting worse, cancer, let's say, and we'll send them off. I know, we'll send you off to do another scan. Now, the patient thinks, well, the doctor wants to do another scan. He doesn't know what's going on. That's good. I feel hopeful. Or sometimes a patient, we've got doctors here, their philosophy is if the patient is dying, better not talk about death. Say to the patient, I'll see you back here in 3 months. So what they're doing is building ambiguity, building uncertainty in order to create hope. Now, that's perfectly legitimate, so long as you know what you're doing. In fact, what is the most perfect hope of all? The miracle. We'll come to it a bit later again, but a miracle is the perfect hope. It's got 0% chance of occurring by definition because it's a miracle, and you hope that it'll happen. So sometimes in my spare time, I go along to casinos just to have a look, of course. Or I watch people buy lotto tickets on the streets in Israel. And I'm telling you, gambling is hoping. It's not happiness. If you want to be happiness, you go down to the beach and you have a swim, or you buy an ice cream on a hot day, or if you're really hard up, you have a beer. But if you want to have hope, a hit of hope, you go and buy a lottery ticket, or you go online poker, or you go to a casino, because you watch them. They put the money in and they pull the machine down, these one-armed bandits, or you buy the ticket and you hope that you win. They don't do it for the happiness. They do it for the hope of the uncertainty of what will happen in the future. That is what hope is. And that's every time we have a patient and we talk to them about hope, that's what's happening. Legitimate, a lot of business is based on hope, but we got to understand what's actually happening in the psychodynamic way. Now, just tell you, if you go onto the internet and you look up all the pictures of Pandora, as I have done, I mean, might think I'm a bit perverted, but they happen to all be young, attractive, half-clad women, naked women. Why? Firstly, they're mostly painted by men, but secondly, they're trying to describe to you the idea of seduction, of possibility, of maybe it will work out with an attractive woman for a man. And it's interesting, it's almost unconscious, but that's what's happening. Future possibility, maybe flirtatiousness. Here she's lifted up the box and you can just see on the left-hand side of the lid, bad things starting to come out. It's certainly attractively clad. Now, the second essential characteristic of hope, which is connected to what we just said, is hope is always experienced as good and pleasant, always. Which is why when you go and buy the lotto ticket, you're uncertain about the future, but you feel good about it. Why? This is hardwired into our brain. Just as if you feel anger, you don't feel happiness or good, you feel angry or sad, you feel tearful, depressed. But hope is always associated with a good feeling. It's a genetically derived thing. The thing that people muddle up in their minds and in the world is that just because you feel good when you hope doesn't mean what you're hoping for is good or that the outcome will be good. They're separate things. And this is why, you know, people come along, they feel hopeful, they'll try a new treatment. The doctors know there's not much chance. but it's this hope, and they become seduced by it, and it confuses them. In fact, there's a lot of evidence in functional MRI scans connecting the reward system of gambling, addiction, seduction, whatever, to hoping. They're very intimately related things in the brain of generating the dopamine and the good feeling. And some people become addicted to, gambling, in a sense, addicted to hoping, or addicted to trying new treatments in their fight against cancer. This is actually an interesting quote from a chap called Zachariah, 2,500 years ago. He used the expression, the prisoner of hope. And I don't think you can have a more accurate description of somebody who's totally focused on trying to cure the disease at expense of everything else, because he's hoping, the prisoner of hope, because of the uncertainty in the future, and it makes him feel good. And God designed the world like this, that hope is good because it'll drag us forward to achieve great things. To get to the moon, to build nuclear power stations. But unfortunately, it can be misused both by the patients and by ourselves to try and have hope when things are not appropriate. Take this, for example. This is a guy called Boris. He was a Polish poet. I got this quote from Yad Vashem. And the poor chap committed suicide in 1951. But he wrote, when he was writing about his experience in Auschwitz, the camp's law is that those going to their death should be deceived until the end. And here the Germans used hope as a tool to manipulate people to their bidding, because hope is an uncertain future. It enabled them to hope, and the people were happy to deceive themselves because they want to feel good. Now, you can't draw a very close analogy between this and chemotherapy, but it's food for thought. This is from a newspaper I found many years ago in Australia. A girl, she was doing IVF to have a baby. Maybe it wasn't so good then. She tried 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 times. And eventually she understood she had to give up the hope. She had imprisoned herself. She was a prisoner of her own hope to have a baby. And if she didn't let go of that hope, she'd be trapped forever. She'd die hoping, as it were, instead of saying, I have to let go of that hope and do something else. And again, I ask you to consider some of the treatment, some of the way we're treating our patients, and what sort of therapies we might offer them. The third essential characteristic of hope, and again, this is hardwired into the brain because it's a cognitive algorithm, is that hope focuses thinking. Every definition of hope includes that it is focused to a goal. You think about the future, you're uncertain about it, you have a goal, you feel good about it, and you go for it. But every time you think about hope, it focuses the thinking. Look at this here now. If you feel hopeless, think, oh shit, sorry, fuck. If you think about, if you're feeling hopeless, maybe some of you have sometimes felt hopeless. I feel hopeless, 2, 3, 4 days a week. And if you look at yourself when you're feeling hopeless, you find that your thinking is disorganized. It's all over the place. You can't focus anything. You haven't got a goal in mind. You're just hopeless. But when you manage to restore the hope, when you get hope back, the thinking is focused, you feel good, you've got goals in mind, you're organized, and you go for it. And again, I'll suggest to you that this is hardwired hope. This is the way hope works. Now, this is also a wonderful, wonderful observation by a chap called Boris, the psychoanalyst that we mentioned him before. Now, this is very good because it leads to an important therapeutic concept. Indeed, there is no torment, no torture, quite like hopelessness. But hopelessness marks the presence of thwarted hope. Hopelessness is when you had a hope, but you've lost it. Hopelessness is not the absence of hope. They're different things. Now, that's going to be a therapeutic option later on, not to hope. But hopelessness is where you've had a hope and you've lost it. Now, another way of looking at this is to think of somebody who is cynical. The opposite of hoping is cynicism. See, if you hope, well, there's something in the future, it's a worthwhile goal, I'll go for it, I feel good about it. If you're a cynic, you say, no, I'm not going to even think about hoping about this. I'm going to stand back and not try it all. It's not going to work. Now, you know, there are defense mechanisms and personality and character, but sometimes it's worthwhile to think about that also. You know, maybe there's a new treatment, maybe we should not be too cynical about it either. So there's a dynamic between hope and cynicism, and it's well worth contemplating and thinking about. So just to review hope's three essential characteristics, my definition: it is an uncertain future, it is only ever pleasant, and it's always directed to a goal to focus thinking. Now we'll go on. So we'll go back to the beginning. Is hope good or is it evil? So we're not having a back and forth chat here. So the Greeks thought hope was evil, and the Judeo-Christian Western world think hope is good. So, you know, there is this idea that the Greeks thought of time as a circular thing, that there was no forward movement in life, there'd be no improvement in the world. Then came along Western civilization from the time of the Renaissance or before, and there was a sense that there was a future, that hope, it was worthwhile to struggle and try and achieve something new. So we go now to Imre Kertész. He got the gong, that is the Nobel Peace Prize for Literature in 2002, for his book Fateless, about his experience in the concentration camps. And this is what he wrote as an acceptance speech. It's well worth reading if you can, because he basically talks about the world and history, and he says, well, look, Western civilization has come along 2,000 years and it's failed, referring to the Holocaust. We've got to start again. And he talked about his experiences in the Hungarian uprising when the Russians came in, where the Russians, like the Germans in World War II, used hope as an instrument of evil. So the Germans, we know, when the Jews came in on the trains, they'd have music there, they'd give them soap and a towel to give them hope, to control them. He said the Russians did the same when they came into Hungary in Budapest in 1956. They gave the intelligentsia the ability to continue having coffee and cake and things like that to control the people. So hope is an instrument. Hope itself is neither good nor evil, is the bottom line. Depends on how you use it. Sometimes we, as I said, we mistake hope for good because it makes us feel good. But we have to separate those two things. The process is not the same as the outcome. So what's the time? Now, I've heard it said a number of times, the expression false hope. Well, I think false hope is an oxymoron. Doesn't make any sense. There's no such thing as false hope, because a 1% chance of some people is hope no good, futile, they won't try it. For some people, it's fantastic. Hope is subjectively assessed. I assess what is hopeful for me. It can't be said that I've got a false hope, because I've had a patient, they said they know there's nothing, but I'm hoping for a miracle. The guy's hopeful. I can't say anything about that. Hope is a subjective reality. So you can't say hope is false. You can't address a patient like that and saying your hope is false. You have to do something else. But directly doing that, because hope can't be disproven. You can't say hope is wrong. Hope doesn't depend on the truth. It's how you feel, your values, your goals, your fears. So I don't tolerate the concept false hope. And then it comes to how important is the goal to the patient? How much is the person prepared to invest in this? And our job as doctors, as therapists, as healers, is to be realistic, to be reasonable. Now, these are vague words. I have to be reasonable with my patient. But that's what it takes. There's no cut and fast rule about whether I should tell the truth or not tell the truth, whether we should give hope or not give hope. Because it's a subjective thing and has to be done each one. You know, often the time in cancer that we give treatment in order to boost hope. I've seen that. We do that. Maybe it's all right, maybe not. I remember once, I don't know if I should say this, but I had this patient in Australia. She was an Israeli girl and she had advanced cancer. She was bright green. And the husband came to me and he told me, I was an oncologist then, look, she's terrified of dying. Why don't you give her some hope? Give her some chemotherapy or something. Well, it's clearly inappropriate to give chemotherapy. So what I did was I put up a litre of saline. I put some vitamin B12 in it, which is bright red, like adriamycin chemotherapy. I ran it in. She felt happy and she died the next day. She was happy, the husband was happy, and there I was. And, you know, when we do the chemotherapy and the treatments, we also have to be very careful. Are we doing this for ourselves or for the patient or for the family? We have to be very insightful into this thing of hope. I felt myself sometimes, I can't give, but then that talk, and then I'd want to help the patient, and I'd be seduced by the enthusiasm and the hope of the patient. But we have to be very clear in our minds whether we're doing it for the patient's good or not. And let's say I give chemotherapy, I understand why I'm doing it, not just to avoid the conversation. And this is an old story. Does telling the truth diminish hope? Does it shorten life? Well, studies in Australia they've done suggest that telling hope or telling the truth does not shorten life. But you've got to understand that's a culture in Australia. It might be very different from the culture in the Middle East or in Eastern Europe or elsewhere. So I don't know, because here I remember the story here of a guy with advanced prostate cancer. And he was a religious fellow, and he was surrounded by a number of other religious fellows. And one of them was a doctor. And he came up to me and he gave me the report of the CT scan. And it was much worse. The disease was progressing, not good. He said, but I've got a different report. I made a forged report and I gave the false report to the patient, which showed that the disease was stable, if not better, in order to preserve hope, to continue life, and so forth. If it works for them, all right, but you've got to scratch your head and wonder what they understand about what's going on. A funny story. And so soon we're going to come to talk about suggested therapies. In a sense, should we stop the process of hoping? Remember, we learned about them saying hopelessness and an absence of hope. And in fact, if you stop hoping, will this prevent despair, fear, demoralization, and hopelessness? Because you're like the cynic, you've got off the train of hoping. So I've got 4 hope therapies. We'll go through them quickly. Colin, what's the time? Oh, we have to finish soon. All right. So one of the hope therapies is to live day by day. Get rid of the future. Don't talk about the future. Let's live day by day. And in that sense, we're getting rid of hope. because hope lives in the future. If we live day by day in the present now, we don't worry about hope, and we won't have the problem that hope can lead to hopelessness and despair. You know, Aldous Huxley's brave now. I said it years ago. Was and will make me ill. I can take a gram and only am. This is about Soma, the drug that they had there. When you think about the past and you think about the future, you get anxious and worried and depressed and churned up and hopeless. But if you take a gram of this Soma, you're only here now. So he wrote it when they had phenobarbital, when they were just bringing the benzodiazepines. And of course, they were anticipating cannabis. This is what cannabis does. It chills them out. No future, no past. I'm just here and now. Now, again, that's fine. If you're not into deep philosophy, into deep personal growth and all that sort of nonsense, maybe that's good. But again, when we give the cannabis, when we give the Valium, we got to know what we're doing. Or a bottle of beer. This is quite nice also. The key point here is the one with no hope also does not fear. Each time we hope, because there's an element of uncertainty about the future, we're also fearful. So if you stand back, you stop thinking about the future, you stop hoping, you can reduce your fear as well. You know, the lady comes in, I remember distinctly, I don't want to do these CT scans anymore because I'm scared about what the result will be. Stop hoping. Get off the caravan. Be a cynic. This is just a fantastic, I mean, you can look up this TED talk with Jill Bolt-Taylor. She was a neuroscientist and she had this massive left brain stroke, and it left her for a while only with her right brain working. And this was, you know, a classic left brain, right brain. And all she could perceive in the right brain was a here and now. This is what she wrote. All I could see was right here, right now, and it was beautiful. So it reminds us of this advertisement for Mercedes-Benz from an advertising agency in Tel Aviv. So the left side of the brain, cognitive, is hope, future planning, cognition. The right side of the brain is living here and now, just chilling out, you know, cannabis and all that. The second therapy is to exchange hope for looking forwards to something. It's quite interesting. Hope looks forward quite into the future, but what if you have an expectation? I expect to see my family at the end of the week. It doesn't involve such risk. It doesn't involve such threat of failure. And you can still allow the patient to live forward, to look forward to something, but without going too far into the future. And in fact, our language provides for that, both in Hebrew and in English. To hope is in the future risk. To wish for something is a little bit less risky, and to expect something is less risky again. The third mechanism is to reflect upon a life lived, to think about the present, go through your past, what you've done, what you've achieved, to find meaning and spirituality in life. Again, meaning and spirituality are values not connected to time. They're values here and now. I can sit here now, I have a meaningful life, I'm spiritually such and such, and I'm not dependent on the future and the risks thereby involved. And this is Breitbart in one of his papers, a really very important ending. The paradox of the end of life dynamic is that through acceptance of the life one has lived comes acceptance of death. And when you read the word acceptance, it's spirituality, meaning, it's the here and now. You're not stuck in this future of the hope, maybe, yes, no, and the fears that accompany it. And finally, I hope to die. Obviously, it's a great paradox, but a lot of people do this. They're exhausted, fatigued, suffering, weary, and I hope to end my life of hoping, since there is no hope. It's no good to hope against hope. So I think we're coming to the end there, yes. So the 4 therapies: live today, day to day, look forwards, review one's life, and then hope that everything ends. So remember, hope, I don't think, is a universal palliative. I know people give lectures, we've got to encourage hope to the end of life. I don't think so. Sometimes hope is a Pandora's box. You've got to be careful. Ah, yes, and now we've finished with Escher's ascending and descending. This was painted in 1960. Extraordinary painting. If you look at the top there, you see these people, you and me, going up the stairs in hope. We go up and up and up, but somehow we don't get anywhere. We're back where we started. Go up and up and up in hope, and back where we started. There are a couple of characters down on the stairs and one on the patio there. You know, maybe they're cynics or maybe they're sociopaths. But anyway, that's a pretty good picture of life. All right, thank you for listening.